Fantastic. So what's everyone's plan for this upcoming weekend?
Not much, man.
No?
Nope. I kind of like that though.
We have an 80s party on Saturday night, so
An 80s party?
yeah.
I
So
like that better.
so at the Airbnb that I'm doing, and there for the next couple of nights, so we just got an Airbnb instead of a hotel. It's called like it's a Back to the Future style house. So like the whole house is like a retro style Atari, like all the old TVs, N64, old Nintendo in there. All the appliances are like all retro. So I'm pretty excited to see that tonight. So that kind of fits into your
Nice.
80s theme style there.
Nice. Yeah, I tried to find a ghetto blaster quick that I couldn't find one.
A ghetto blaster?
You remember those? It had the
Like
big-
you're looking for tapes too, right? You got
Tape.
some of those laying around, throw them in there.
we purged those with the yeah, we grew up in the era of tapes and early
Hey,
days.
boombox? Are you talking like a boombox?
Yeah.
Yeah, like a boombox. Like you put,
Okay.
8 D-cell batteries in it.
Wow.
Traditional
Yeah.
carry.
I mean, yeah, that wasn't my thing, man. That was before my time.
Yeah, you fancy CD people.
I know, right? Well, I still had cassettes back in the day, but yeah.
Yeah.
We definitely were in the main CD revolution. All right. Well, we're gonna go ahead and get rolling pretty quickly, just to make sure everyone's staying on schedule and on time. So first off, thanks everyone for joining us today. This really is just a basic conversation on industrial press upgrades, what you need to know, what you need to be a part of. Find Zelstra where we are all from. We do a lot of press upgrades and control upgrades. And today we just kind of want to share some of the knowledge and some of the experience that we have to offer, and we can maybe be a partner in future applications. So with me today is, first off, I'm Jake Hall. I'm a business development manager here at Find Zelstra, and then I'm also known as the manufacturing millennial. And then with me today is Justin Dykstra and Kyle Reiser. Justin, you want to introduce yourself and Kyle follow up?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Justin Dykstra, controls engineer at FZ. Like Jake said, I've been involved in quite a few press upgrades over the years. So I'm just hopefully I can answer some good questions and go through some of the basics.
Perfect. And Kyle.
Yeah, thanks, Jake, for hosting. My name's Kyle Reiser. I'm responsible here at FC for customer success and our solutions, and I manage a team that engages with many different types of manufacturers, including customers that have press operations or press machines. And I've got a background of over 25 years in the engineering and automation realm, whether it be working at some large-scale multinational vendors, as well as doing engineering projects, one of which was on a press. So we'll talk about that a little later, but thanks, Jake.
Fantastic. Oh, and I forgot to ask, if you were famous, what would you be famous for?
Yeah, so I'll go first and then I'll pass to Justin because something comes to mind. So if I was famous, I would like to be famous and known for motocross. So in the last couple of years, me and my son have been getting into trail riding and motocross while my body can still do it. And obviously he's much younger, so his body can definitely do it. But we've been learning together and watching a lot of races. And as a kid, I always wanted to get into it. Total midlife crisis thing for me. So if I was famous, I'd love to be a motocross rider. So.
And what about you, Justin?
I like that one, the motocross. That's a good thing, but I've been out of the game for a little while. But I do more of the golfing now. So anybody that knows me probably knows exactly what I'm going to say. Before this, they would have known I would have said I'd be a pro golfer. So that's something I'm also trying to get my kids into, and I'm hoping it sticks. So it's something we can play long into the future, but probably not professionally. But yeah, that's the dream.
There we go. And for me, I love cooking and barbecue. So for me, I love to be known as a famous, world-renowned barbecue and chef. So that would be my wish to fame. So yeah, let's kind of move into the discussion a little bit, and we're going to kind of dive into the discussion of press upgrades. I think it's kind of interesting. Presses have been around for a really long time. In fact, the first really stamping press and application was around the 1550s for coin making. Was kind of how things evolved, and then it took almost 300 years to really evolve into a physical product, which was bicycles. So in Europe, stamping bicycle frames was one of the first components. And in fact, it didn't take until like 20 or 30 years later to make it to here in the United States, where Henry Ford, as we all know, of the mass assembly, mass production guy, he did not really adapt stamping as a process until they couldn't get consistent parts in stamping. So Henry Ford, the guy who loved this idea of mass production in the assembly line, was actually super opposed to presses to make the Model T. So I thought that was kind of an interesting fact. But what we're moving into now is around stamping presses. So when we think of the different types of presses that we out there, there's servo presses, there's hydraulic, and there's mechanical presses. Let's go ahead and jump into that right away. What is the difference we see between those three presses: servo, hydraulic, mechanical, and what are some of the pros and cons of each system? Who wants to kind of run with that?
Yeah, I can start with that. So basically, the most obvious thing with that is going to be the energy source, right? So first of all, the most common is your mechanical press. The energy from that press is generated from an electric motor that's coupled to a flywheel, right? And when that flywheel gets going, that's what creates your energy, which is connected to the crankshaft of the press, which is controlled by the clutch brake assembly. And then that is operated through pneumatic solenoids. So that being said, that's probably the most widely known, right? That's probably the one that they made in the 1500s, some variation of that. But hydraulic, on the other hand, as you can imagine, we're using fluid power on that. So you're going to have another motor / pump that's going to be energizing this closed loop system. And then the movement and pressure built up with the hydraulics is going to get your cylinder to go up and down, create your tonnage. And then again, the servo, pretty self-explanatory, right? You got a servo or multiple servo motors that get that tooling to go up and down. So
now,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Justin.
No, I was just going to go into some of the pros and cons to it. But,
oh, please, yeah.
No, yeah. So just the mechanical, the clutch brake systems. Those honestly are more of just kind of like a lower level, like a simpler tooling process. They're definitely the quickest. If you were to categorize them from fast to not so much, the mechanical is definitely going to be your best bet. It's going to go hundreds of inches per minute. It's super simple. I mean, these presses are just like milled pieces bolted together. You put some lubrication system on it and they take off, right?
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it. The hydraulic system is going to be a slower process, but that's also used for different operations as well. You're going to be more in-depth, larger products that you're going to be drawing or larger tonnage amounts as well. So, and then the servo is kind of a mix between the two.
Yep. So when we look at these presses, as I mentioned, a lot of these presses, we just saw some, Justin, that are 30, 40 years old, but there's plenty that are older than that. What is the general life expectancy of a press? And I kind of look at this from a 2-point perspective. There's the life expectancy of the mechanical portion of a press, and then there's a life expectancy of kind of almost the controls portion of the press. When people have presses on their floor for a long time, what does that look like, and what should they expect with life expectancy on their machine?
Well, that's a good question. Honestly, the life expectancy, like you said, the mechanical portion, that can be a very, very long time if it's maintained properly. If you're staying up on your PMs, mechanical press. It's funny. So I have a customer in Kansas City, and this is probably like an old wives' tale there, but they have a press on site from the 1920s.
Wow.
So you're looking at a century of use of this press. And now I haven't seen it myself. That's why I say it might be kind of a wives' tale, but it's easily.
Did it used to press coins? Same
Well,
guys.
these are more projectile style presses, but
Okay.
yeah. So, but yeah, to go along with the controls components on it, I mean, they're especially way back then. It's just simple relay logic, and as far as controls go, we all know how quickly the industry changes as far as that's concerned. So when you compare the two, your lifespan for controls and safety and processes is going to be a lot shorter than the mechanical side of it.
So when we look at the electrical side, I think that's one of the things that we're kind of talking about today is upgrading your control presses and your presses and controls. A lot of these old presses have a lot of old just push button interfaces with a lot of manual settings. And we look into upgrading your press into a modern PLC and a modern control system, updating your panel, updating a lot of the safety that wasn't compliant, that would not be compliant now, that people didn't look at 20, 30, 40 years ago, when a person could just go up to machine and reach in and grab a part as the machine cycles up and down. What are some of the pros and cons that we look at when we're upgrading presses? Really from a manufacturer's point of view, what are some of the benefits they're going to see when they upgrade a press, and then what are some of the risks or cons that are associated with it?
Yeah, I can hit on from a commercial standpoint, and maybe just can hit on more of the technical side. I mean, when you look at a big pro of upgrading your press is to just CapEx avoidance of a new machine. I mean, we've heard from a number of customers that they make the decision to retrofit, upgrade, enhance the press from a controls and automation standpoint, because a brand new press from a manufacturer could have a lead time of 12 to 24 months right now in the market today. Lead times on just the steel and aluminum and metals to manufacture these rather large, really simple machines. They go up and down, and some of them book out. Some of them got different pins that go in and out. Some of them have the more complex ones have automatic die changeovers for more high-speed operations. Lead time is a consideration when press upgrade that at least brings controls, visualization, better troubleshooting, more uptime, enhanced safety. Go out down the whole list. Could be done in 3 to 6 month time frame, or even quicker. The other thing is just cost, right? I mean, I don't really have averages, but I would say a brand new press is upwards of at least north of 2 million, if not more, in CapEx investment. Now that has a lot of benefits on the financial side to an asset of the company, a depreciating asset of the company that holds its value because a lot of presses are resold on the used market or repurposed. Whereas, you could retrofit that press for a quarter of that cost or even lower, right? So from a commercial standpoint, I think it's important to look at the angles there because ultimately people who prove the money are going to ask these types of questions. But Justin, what are some pros and cons on upgrading presses from a technical and safety perspective?
Well, yeah, from a safety perspective, I mean, that's what's number one, honestly. And it's going to keep your operators safer. Maybe, just obviously from a pinch point standard from anybody maybe bypassing a safety device and being injured inside the press, but also you can change things to be more ergonomical as well. I mean, maybe something overlooked, but if you're an operator working on a press, that's something that's on the radar, VHS, and, something that we can incorporate into our design as well. And that's on a lower level, but also when we add all these new controls, we can monitor things. I mean, presses are simple, right? Like you said, up and down, but you can add different devices on there. You can monitor certain analytics, data acquisition, stuff of that nature. So there's a lot of benefits to that. And like you said, yeah.
I think to your point earlier about you get some of these mechanical presses at a pretty high frequency. There's wear parts that when you're not monitoring, the
Yeah.
fluids, or you're not monitoring the viscosity and some of these elements, it ends up being a catastrophic failure versus driving your PMs a little differently, right?
Hmm. Yeah, very true.
One of the other things that I think, is noteworthy is the fact of a standardization across presses. A lot of times manufacturers are going to have a wide variety of different presses from different manufacturers that are, producing product for them. A lot of times these presses, which have been in operation for 30 or 40 years, have had that same operator running it during that time. Well, that operator is going to eventually retire, who knows all of the, the tweaks and torques around a press and how it runs from press to press to press. As this older workforce who's been in this situation for a long time retires, there's going to be have to someone new to come and replace it. And I think going into an automated system with controls where everything is on a screen, where all this data can be manually tracked and automatically tracked on a PLC or on a control system, is so much more benefit to the customer, because we're reducing risk. We're creating a standardization across all my presses, but then all that information can now be stored like on an HMI that's behind, Kyle right now, where before all these settings were done on knobs or buttons, can now be done on a PLC and tracked. And I think that's a big thing as well for press upgrades. That's one thing we're doing at a large automotive company right now, is we're taking 6 presses, and all the HMIs and all the screens are going to be the exact same between all of them. So even if you have an operator who's running a different manufacturing press from a different brand, they can still run a press that was made in Japan versus a press that was made in Germany the exact same way, because the control system is standardized across that. And I think that's a big, risk reducer as well from a manufacturing perspective. It's not just the ROI, it's not just the capital, it's ensuring that your company can continue to make product easily as we, battle this labor shortage. So when we talk about press up, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I think the from a replaceability of some of these parts, as Justin said, the mysterious 1920s press with relay logic and probably some really interesting instrumentation. If you look at the old back in the day, how they did, just positioning instead of, how today would use, encoder systems and even when you fast forward to the 80s and 90s and how some of these presses are controlled, I mean, people troubleshooting these things are, modern engineers, and lump those folks into like saying between, the no years experience and 30 years experience, some of these things are definitely take more time to. And I think we hear a lot, Jake, a number of customers that we've talked to and engaged with is just, if eBay is your part source, you probably should consider a different path. I mean, as engineers, we're all trained to reduce risk, and that's a pretty risky operations when you have to go get this slick or this old controller or this obscure IO block, and your only source is eBay.
So when we look at these press upgrades, what is the general cost? I know that's such an arbitrary number, because depending on the size of the press, just now we looked at a press on Monday that's 20,000 square feet in size, and then there's other presses that are your typical 800 or 1,000 ton press. What is the typical cost investment that we normally see as a general consensus across the board?
Yeah, so like you said, it is kind of it's a sliding scale, because it depends on the press. And I say that on repeat with presses, because it really does matter. There's such a broad range of presses. But like for hard numbers, I guess, you'll see the little 30, 40 ton presses. There's really no enclosure, pretty old. I just saw one come across my email the other day, and thinking of something smaller along those lines, we can make that incredibly safe and up to the best safety standards as possible for let's say 100,000 to 150, but that's like the bare minimum. That's the lowest, and that's a sliding scale up to, maybe $1 million, depending on what the size of your press is, what your ancillary equipment is, and all of that stuff. But like Kyle said earlier, when you're talking about that investment versus buying a new press that's $8 million, it's a pretty good offset there, in my opinion. So
Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think one approach we use, Jake, is we can give sort of ranges, but one approach we use is we step ahead on like an engineering study. So we have a set list of things we look at, deliverables that the end user gets, and those sort of engineering studies can range between 15 and 25,000. Takes us
Mhm.
2 to 4 weeks to sort of assess it. And what's interesting about that is um, you can't over engineer something to get to the price. And at the end of the day, that we can give sort of swag and budgetary numbers to folks, but then to get down to like, how much should I ask for my capital expense? Or if it isn't plus negative 30%, how do I get it plus negative 5%? Well, the engineering study is a great option to just people wade into that. And we have a lot of customers are thinking more and more like that, because it reduces the risk for them, and know what they're going to get, as well as it reduces risks for engineering companies and integration firms. So,
I'm going to take that conversation, just talk about risk. And I think that's one of those things is risk a lot of times is reduced by preparation. So what are some of the best ways to prepare for a press or a major system upgrade? When we're going into these press upgrades, and it's not like we just walk on and we just immediately start tearing down the press and throwing stuff in there. What does that process look like in terms of, the customer says, hey, we're ready for a press upgrade. What is really this project process that we're handling all the way up to, flipping on the new control system and running?
yeah, so basically the first step for us is we just want to sit down with the customer, at least have one meeting, a couple of meetings in succession, where we can talk about their application, what in their mind do they want to see happen with this press upgrade, right? So then we kind of have a base of what we're working off from. Then what we do is we have one of our senior service technicians come out along with an engineer, and they get their boots on the ground, and they spend a week and a half out on the floor just doing the ins and outs of this press, just looking at everything that we need to know in order to achieve the goals that the customer has for their press upgrade. And then once we have that time out on the floor, then we put together documentation as far as the engineering study goes and how that lines up with what the customer would like, and then we submit that detailed document on the plans that we have, the things that we found. Maybe what we find is something that they didn't realize needed to be fixed, or, but the end goal is to get the press to the safest, best process position as possible while working together kind of as a team on the project.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we wrap that up with, you're talking about, safety. As one thing about presses is, if the presses were built 40 or 50 years ago, they don't have necessarily fall underneath the same standards as they do now. If you want, we just want to briefly talk about, I know this could be a whole other conversation, but it's something that I want to bring up. What standards have changed, or what are some things that manufacturers need to be aware of as these presses are upgraded? What should we know about what has changed in terms of the standards on safety in the industry?
Well, one of the basic things, I mean, like you said, this is a major depth of things to talk about here, but honestly, the first thing you think about with safety is your safety devices, right? Your e-stops, your die blocks, your cycle start buttons, things of that nature. Many of these devices are just single channel. And in order to meet today's standards, they need to be dual channel. And then depending on what safety level you're shooting for, they need to have monitoring, self-monitoring as well. So that's a major one. And I'm going back to a mechanical press here, but one of the major safety devices on that maybe some people don't think about is the valve that controls the clutch, right? Because that's what's gonna stop that press in an emergency scenario or just in normal operation. So that also, I saw one not that long ago, a few months ago, that there was the original valve on the clutch brake assembly, and it was not pretty. So that's one thing that's kind of way up on the crown. It's outside of everybody's, line of sight, and you might forget about it. But that's a super important part of the press, and it needs to function properly and safely. And, as well as I do, moving from single channel to dual channel, you get that safety value of short circuits being overridden, things like that. So,
Yep.
And I think if we move to a modern safety PLC and safety controller, it does, and it's sort of a modern way of looking at safety control systems. It does eliminate or at least mitigate a level of tampering that can be happening. I think it's in plants all the time. People, might different motivations on trying to circumvent, establish safety regimes or processes or gate locks or, lockout tagout procedures. I think introducing, like I said, dual channels and from a maintainability standpoint, and teeing up a press to be ready for the next 30 years and having a lot less, open potential for corrosion and stuff using modern, networks and stuff for sensors. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's a lot of, tampering that goes on in plants for many different reasons. And I think with two-hand control and maybe some logging some data on who's logged in and who's operating the press, as well as safety controllers, you can almost make it fail-safe. And not only fail-safe, but fail-safe from a safety circumvention or safety tampering perspective too.
Yep, absolutely. So I just brought that up because I think it's important for manufacturers to realize when you're doing these upgrades, you just want to make sure you're partnering with a systems integrator or a company who understands these standards and understands that a press upgrade is beyond just replacing the existing equipment, but it's bringing up to the standards that need to happen to ensure that your press is following all ANSI and OSHA regulations. So it's just some good information to add to that. Well, wrapping it up with kind of our final question, Kyle or Justin, I always ask this at the end. Is there one question that you guys wish I would have asked that I didn't, that you want to add on to our press upgrade conversation?
Kyle?
Or did I just nail everything out of the park?
I don't know. You're pretty stellar at this, Jake.
Yeah, I think it might be, one question is this: how far do you go on press upgrades? And I think that's one of the things that, you can start, we've got some customers who want to do soup to nuts, whether it be collection system, remote VPN connectivity, move into a warranty where we have 2 or 4 4-hour SLAs, or they want to go to the bare minimum and just say, hey, I just want to replace some of the stuff I can't get because it's been end of life by the vendor from an electronic standpoint.
Yeah.
And it's easy to say go middle ground, but in my opinion, it's like if you're going to ask for $300,000 to upgrade a press, and you can add data collection for another 20, or another, put in a 2-channel system, or add some safety mats, ask for the full amount, because it's these assets from a finance standpoint are looked at every 10 to 20 years. So I encourage customers to do it, and at least to ask for the full allocation and get a project schedule in place where you can add all the stuff, because inevitably these machines are looked at as depreciating assets, and the next allocation could be 15 years out. So ask for it all, and then build your return on investment strategy, as well as build in safety elements that are somewhat immeasurable, but in a lot of cases That is, when we engage with customers, that's like the sole reason why people upgrade is just, it's unsafe. And that you can't put a cost on a near miss or an injury or a loss of life. And that does happen in these big machines, or loss of limbs and stuff like that. Right. So that was the only question I'd say.
Yep.
And the answer, by the way.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for attending this webinar. We're going to go ahead and follow up with just a quick survey just to figure out what we could do better, what you enjoyed about it. But once again, thank you for joining us. Kyle and Justin, thank you for taking some time to discuss press upgrades and bringing some of your knowledge to the table to share with the rest of the community. But until then, thank you for guys joining this Find Zelstra press upgrade webinar. We have these about once a month, and we're looking forward to the next topic. Until then, have a great week. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks, Justin.
See ya.